Good morning, everybody. I'm still a little traumatized about thinking of Chris looking in the mirror and seeing Steve. So I don't know what he's talking about. I don't want to do that. It's good to see you this morning. Glad that you're here. We're always grateful for those of you that are visiting with us, that you've made the decision to take of your time to be with us and worship this morning, and that's always an encouragement to us. So we're glad that you're here. Ray Blankenship was in his kitchen one morning fixing breakfast, not unlike he did most every morning. As he was fixing his breakfast, he looked out his kitchen window. And beside his house, there was a drainage ditch that ran there, and he could see that ditch through the kitchen window. And it had been raining quite a bit, and as a result, that ditch had flooding in it. And this particular morning, as he looked out the window, to his horror, he saw a little girl struggling in that drainage ditch in the water going by his house. So he immediately ran out his front door, and he ran as fast as he could to try to not only just catch up to where the girl was, but to get ahead of her. And he was able to do that. And he jumped immediately into the water, and he reached out and was able to grab the arm of the little girl. And they tumbled end over end through the water. You see, the drainage ditch would run under a road and ultimately into a drainage culvert. He was desperately grasping for anything he could find to hold on to. 3 feet before they reached that drainage culvert, his free arm was able to grab hold to a tree limb. He held on with everything that he had, and he thought in his mind, if I can just hold on till help gets here. Well, he was able to do better than that. He was able to pull that little girl up onto the bank of the river and ultimately himself saving the little girl's life. He would go on to receive the Coast Guard Silver Life-Saving Medal for showing extreme courage. But here, to me, is the most amazing part of the story. Ray Blankenship didn't even know how to swim. You see, he left his house that morning and he did something that by most accounts, all of us in this room would say is courageous. You know, that word courage, it's an important word in our culture. It's a value that we esteem very highly. What is courage, though? Webster's dictionary defines courage this way: mental or moral strength to persevere and withstand fear, danger, or difficulty. I think we could, at least to some degree, agree on that definition. But did you know courage is also a biblical subject? Paul would say this to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 13 as he's closing out the book. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Now you might be saying to yourself, wait a minute, I don't see the word courage up there. But if you were to go back to the original language and look at that phrase, act like men, that phrase means be courageous. That's actually what it means. And so Paul is writing to a church that's struggling in a lot of ways. There are a lot of difficulties. There's division that's been ripping the church apart. There's sin that exists amongst some members in the church. And as Paul is closing it out, one of the things he says to them is, you have courage. You be courageous. So we see courage from a worldly standpoint. We can know that courage is a biblical topic, but we're still left wondering, what does real courage look like in action? And why is it important for us in our lives? This morning, I want us to think about courage through the example of Jesus. You know, Jesus was left for us as an example to follow. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21 would tell us. And so you and I look to Jesus for everything, but do you ever stop and think about Jesus as an example of courage? I want to look briefly this morning at 3 examples from the life of Jesus that I think help illustrate his courage and maybe give us some insight, and then we'll end with a discussion about why all this matters. Open your Bibles with me to start with to John chapter 10. John chapter 10. And the first thing that we're going to see this morning is courage involves selflessness. Courage involves selflessness. John chapter 10, let's begin reading in verse number 1.
Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. So Jesus here in John chapter 10 actually tells two parables. You see, he starts out in verses 1 through 6 telling one parable, but many times, as the audience would struggle with, they didn't comprehend or fully understand what Jesus was saying. So he continues on with this second part of the parable, maybe we would say. And maybe it's a little difficult for us in our culture, thousands of years removed from Middle Eastern shepherding, to understand exactly what Jesus was saying. So let's try to paint a little bit of a picture. You see, during Jesus' time, shepherds would take their sheep out to pasture during the day. And then multiple shepherds would bring their flocks back in the evening. And they would put all their flocks together in this one holding pen, we might call it. But you see, there was only one door into this holding pen. And there would be a porter that would stand guard over that one door during the night. And then in the morning, all the shepherds would come, and each shepherd would enter one by one and would call out to the sheep. And the sheep would know the shepherd's voice. You see, the shepherd would talk to the sheep. They would even name their sheep, much like we would a pet. And so while the shepherds were out during the day, they were talking to the sheep became accustomed to their voices. And so when that shepherd would walk in and he would call for his flock amongst the several that were in that holding pen, the sheep immediately knew his voice, and they would come to him. So Jesus describes three types of people, we might say, in these parables. He talks about thieves and robbers. And he says in verse 10 that they come only to steal and kill and destroy. There's nothing good about their intentions. They're driven by selfish motives. But then he talks about a hired hand as well. And you see, he doesn't own the sheep. He doesn't have any vested interest. So when danger comes, he flees because there's no reason for him to risk his life for something that is of no significant value per se to him. But then Jesus describes the Good Shepherd. And of course we know that Jesus is ultimately talking about himself. He would say, I am the Good Shepherd, that I've come to give life and give it abundantly. But I want you to notice what Jesus says here on multiple occasions. In verse 11 he says, the Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. In verse 15 at the end he says, I lay down my life for the sheep. In verse 17, I lay down my life that I may take it up again. Jesus talks repeatedly in these parables about laying down his life, but verse 18 is the key. He says, no one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. Think about that for just a moment. Think about the courage that it took for Jesus to do what he was going to do, to go through everything that he was going through, and to do it because he willfully chose to do it. He willfully chose to put himself in place of us, to take on the punishment that you and I deserve. And he even says, I have the authority to take it up again. We sing a song sometimes. He could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free. But he died alone for you and me. Do we believe those words? I think we do. I think we all believe with our hearts that Jesus, as God, had the ability at any moment to call legions of angels to relieve him of the suffering that he was going through. But yet, Jesus says, as the good shepherd, the one that's invested in his sheep, the one that wants to give life and give it more abundantly, he says, I lay down my life and I do it freely, willfully. You see, true courage takes selflessness. It's not about what Jesus wanted. It's about what he knew was in the best interest of those that he came not only to save, but also to serve. So courage takes selflessness. But courage also involves steadfastness. For this one, I want you to turn with me to Mark chapter 14, just a few pages back in your New Testaments. Mark chapter 14. We're going to begin reading in verse 32 in just a moment as we look at Mark's account of the scene in Gethsemane. But as you're turning there, I want to just set the stage a little bit, if you will, and provide a little bit of background of everything that's been going on. And Luke's gospel does a nice job of sharing this information with us. In Luke chapter 22, we read some things that are happening in the life of Jesus leading up to this moment in Gethsemane. So Jesus has been in an upper room somewhere in Jerusalem, sharing some intimate moments with those closest to him, his apostles. He has shared the Passover meal with them. He has instituted the Lord's Supper. And in the midst of all of that, this incredible, special, intimate moment, there erupts this argument amongst the apostles about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And we're literally just hours away from Jesus' arrest, his mock trials, ultimately the beatings that he would be going through. And you can only imagine where Jesus is mentally and emotionally in those moments. And then in those moments, when he needs his apostles, they're arguing over who's going to be the greatest. And immediately after that, he would predict Peter's denial. Then they would leave that upper room, and Jesus is going to take his inner circle, we might say, of the 12, those that are closest to him, and he's going to go to a place that he knows, that's familiar to him. And let's pick up that story in Mark chapter 14, verse 32. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. You know, you think about Jesus' ministry as a whole. You think about the energy that he invested into those closest to him, the 12 specifically, but even beyond that. Think about how much pressure must have been on him at times as he would travel and go into towns, and those that had heard of his miracles would come begging him to heal, to provide some type of blessing. I have to believe there were many times when Jesus was tired and just wanted a break, but yet there was such a great need and he would continue on in his ministry. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times did Jesus need strengthening during those moments? But yet, throughout Scripture, we really don't read a lot of the disciples strengthening him. He got his strength through prayer. So in this moment of his greatest need, he does what he's always done. He goes to the Father in prayer, but yet he takes Peter, James, and John, those that he's become closest to, and he says, look, he gives them two commands. He says, remain here and watch, verse 34. Seems rather straightforward, doesn't it? Doesn't even seem overly complicated. Stay here and stay awake, in essence. Jesus is in his greatest hour of personal need. He's struggling. He's struggling with what lies ahead. He knows everything he's about to endure, and he's praying to God with everything he has in him. If there's any other way, please. But yet, in the greatest example of submission, he says, not what I want, but what you will, Father. And he's counting on these three individuals to provide their support by remaining there and watching. But yet, he goes back after an hour and they're asleep. And in fairness to them, they're tired. It's late at night. It's been a long day. And they don't fully comprehend still. In spite of everything that Jesus has told him, they're struggling in their own right to comprehend everything that's happening. And it's easy for us, through the lens of history and hindsight, to look back and to see and to think they should have done this or they should have done that. But yet they just succumb to physical tiredness. You ever been that tired where you just can't keep your eyes open? Some of you are experiencing that now. It happens. It's okay. But you know, we've all been in that situation where we just get tired. But yet Jesus finds himself needing support. But yet he finds himself alone. But here's what's always amazing. He's not alone, is he? You see, I think it's Luke's gospel account would tell us that it was God that supported him. He sent an angel to support him during his greatest hour of need. But you think of the steadfastness that it required of Jesus during this moment. The steadfastness to keep his feet firmly planted in the moment, with his eyes set entirely on what lied ahead, knowing what God required of him, doing it of his own free will, not being forced to, but doing it because he submitted to his Father, but yet without the support of those closest to him. That's courage. It takes courage to do something without any support around you. It takes steadfastness and resolve in knowing that whatever it is you have to do is that important. So we see this element of courage in Mark chapter 14. But courage also involves conviction. And I invite you back to John's gospel this time in John chapter 18, where we will finish our final thoughts this morning. So we've been through this progression. We see an element of Jesus' ministry as he's teaching in parables, talking about how he is the good shepherd. We then fast forward to the final hours, if you will, of Jesus' time with his apostles. And now we have exited the garden. John's gospel does not record
the scene in Gethsemane. But it picks up immediately after that event in John chapter 18 and verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, those words that we just read in Mark chapter 14, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priest and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with him. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. So he asked them again, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one." Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Can you imagine the emotional and physical strength it took for Jesus to get up from that prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane and leave to go face those who are going to betray him? You ever been in a situation emotionally where you were so distraught you didn't feel like you had the physical energy to even get up and move? But yet Jesus gets up, and he doesn't just get up and walk out. I picture him walking out, standing tall. When everyone around him is tired and emotionally weak and vulnerable and chaos is about to erupt, Jesus is the calmest one in the group. It says that he went out. And not only does he go out, he goes to a place where everybody knows he'll be, a place he would visit frequently. And as the mob approaches with their torches and lanterns and swords, and Judas leads the way, Jesus steps forward, I believe in part to protect his apostles. He steps forward and he asks, "Whom do you seek?" You know, Jesus did his work in the light of day. The betrayers come in the darkness of night. But yet Jesus doesn't hide. He steps forward. He says, "I am he. I'm the one you're looking for." They were so shocked they fell to the ground. I mean, that's not what you expect, is it? If you're going to arrest someone, I mean, I would have to believe we've got several in our audience this morning that are either currently working in law enforcement or have in the past. Most of the time when you're looking for someone that has a warrant for their arrest, they're not there voluntarily saying, "Here I am, come get me." But yet Jesus steps forward. He says, "I'm the one you're looking for." And when they still kind of are in shock, he asks them again, "Who are you seeking?" "I'm he. I'm the one." You think about the conviction it took for Jesus in this moment when chaos is around him to have the calmness and the collectiveness, but not just that, the conviction to step forward and say, "I'm the one you want. Here I am. Bind my hands. Take me." You see, Jesus, when he left that garden, after his moment of anguish, was convicted wholeheartedly in the mission that lied ahead. And he approached that mission by himself, without the support of those closest to him, voluntarily laying down his life. You see, that's courage. But then we have to ask ourselves this: why does it matter? I mean, it's a great example, but what does it mean for you and I just in practical day-to-day life? I'll give us one example to think about. Luke chapter 9, verses 23 through 24. "And Jesus said to all, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever will lose his life for my sake will save it. Think about some of the words with me that we see in this verse. Denying self, taking up our cross, losing our life, saving our life. I mean, these are words that if we really allow them to sink in, they're deep and they should be scary to us on some level because the commitment that's required is substantial. You know, one of the things that always fascinates me when Jesus extends an invitation, He challenges people to really think about whether or not to accept that. Because you see, what He's asking is something significant. It's not a haphazard or a by-the-way commitment. He's asking for every bit of an individual to submit their lives to His lordship and rule in their life. So you think about the example of courage that Jesus left. The things that we've talked about this morning. And we think about denying ourselves and taking up a cross and being willing to lose our lives so that we can save it. And it requires selflessness. It requires steadfastness. It requires conviction because you see, being a disciple of Jesus means that I have to put other people before me. Selflessness. It means that there are going to be times that I'm literally going to be by myself without anyone there to encourage me to follow Jesus, but yet it takes courage to continue going down that path. And there are times that I'm going to be tired and I may feel like giving up and I may not even understand why, but it takes conviction for me to believe fully in the mission that Jesus left and the fact of who He is and that He is the Messiah and He is Lord of my life. And all of these things add up in their sum to be the courage that's needed to follow Jesus. So you think about courage. You think about what it means. You think about the example of Jesus. And I'm challenged this morning in my own life, and the challenge for each one of you this morning is this. Do we have the courage to follow Jesus? I mean, really follow Him. I mean, get out of our comfort zones, go places that we would never think we could go, allow Him to use us in ways we never dreamed He could, to be His hands and His feet, to give up our own lives, to give up our own desires, to give up what we want so that we can be what He wants us to be. Do you have the courage to follow Jesus this morning? If we can be an encouragement to you, we want to do that. We want to encourage you to have that type of courage. We want to lean on each other. We want to challenge and encourage everybody in the audience this morning. Don't quit. Keep following Him minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day. If we can help you this morning in your walk with Jesus, if you'd like to know more about Him, if we can help you, if you're discouraged, we want to help you have the courage you need to follow Him. Just let us know how we can help you now while together we stand and sing.